In September 2025, something unusual happened at a summit of world leaders. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin were caught on a hot microphone discussing human lifespan, not economic policy, not military strategy, longevity. Xi's translator was heard saying, "Predictions are, this century, there's a chance of also living to 150. The 72-year-old Chinese leader added that these days, at 70, one is still considered a child. Two of the most powerful people on Earth were casually talking about nearly doubling the human lifespan as though it were already underway. And here's the remarkable thing. They weren't fantasizing. They were responding to what's happening in laboratories right now. At Harvard University, David Sinclair's graduate students are reversing aging in mice, not by 10 or 20%, but by 50, 75, even 90%. Sinclair himself says, "This isn't science fiction. We do this in my lab. My graduate students are doing this all the time." Mice that were elderly, with clouded vision, frail bones, slow movements, are being restored to youth, not just slowed in their decline, reversed. Their cells remember how to be young again, and scientists have learned how to remind them. Before we start, a quick roll call. Write in the comments which part of this planet you're watching from, and then just listen and enjoy. So here's the question we're exploring together. Are we the first generation that won't have to age? Not the first to live longer. That's already happened. But the first to stop aging altogether, to reverse the clock, to step out of time's current. By the end of this series, we'll understand what's actually possible, what the timeline looks like, who the key players are, and what it means if millions of us reach 150 by the middle of this century. We'll look at the science without hype, the money being poured into this work, and the world that emerges when human lifespans stretch beyond anything our ancestors imagined. The 20th century gave humanity an extraordinary gift. We added roughly 30 years to average human lifespan. In 1900, life expectancy hovered around 47 years. By 2000, it had climbed past 76 in developed nations. That's an entire additional generation. But here's what most people don't realize. That extension came almost entirely from reducing early deaths. We conquered infant mortality, infectious diseases, and many causes of premature death. We didn't slow aging itself. We just allowed more people to reach old age. An 80-year-old in 2000 wasn't biologically younger than an 80-year-old in 1900. They'd simply survived longer. This century is different. The project now isn't to help more people reach 80. It's to make 80-year-olds biologically 50. It's to intervene in the aging process itself, at the cellular, genetic, and molecular level. This is the difference between lifespan extension and aging reversal. Lifespan extension is what we've been doing, keeping people alive longer despite their aging bodies. Aging reversal is what's beginning now, making the body young again. One is defensive. The other is transformative. Why is 2025 so different from 2015? 3 things converged. First, we finally understand what aging is. For most of human history, aging was a mystery, inevitable, universal, untouchable. But in the past 15 years, scientists identified the 12 hallmarks of aging: genomic instability, telomere shortening, epigenetic changes, loss of protein function, mitochondrial failure, cellular senescence, and others. Aging stopped being a vague process and became a set of identifiable, measurable problems. And problems, once identified, can be solved. Second, the tools arrived. Artificial intelligence now allows researchers to screen trillions of molecular combinations in months. Work that would have taken hundreds of thousands of years before. CRISPR gene editing lets scientists rewrite DNA with precision. Biological clocks, developed in the last decade, can measure how old your body truly is at the cellular level, independent of your birth certificate. These aren't incremental improvements. They're capabilities that didn't exist a generation ago. Third, the money came. Jeff Bezos founded Altos Labs in 2021 with a $3 billion commitment to cellular reprogramming. Google launched Calico Labs in 2013 to tackle aging as an engineering problem. Yuri Milner, Mark Zuckerberg, and other billionaires have poured hundreds of millions more into longevity research. This isn't charity, it's investment. These are people betting that the science will work, that regulatory approval will come, that markets will open. When the world's wealthiest individuals start spending fortunes on something, it's worth paying attention. Not because they're right, but because their resources accelerate what's possible. The scientists leading this work are household names in their fields. David Sinclair at Harvard has become the public face of aging research, predicting age-reversing pills within the next decade. Shinya Yamanaka won the Nobel Prize in 2006 for discovering that 4 proteins could reset adult cells to an embryonic state, a finding now being adapted to reverse aging without creating embryos. Juan Carlos Izpisua Belmonte extended mouse lifespan by 30% in 2016 using partial cellular reprogramming. Steve Horvath developed the first accurate biological clocks that measure cellular age. Aubrey de Grey, the controversial British gerontologist, has been arguing since the early 2000s that we'll reach longevity escape velocity, the point where we gain more than a year of life for every year that passes by the mid-2030s. 10 years ago, he sounded like science fiction. Today, his timeline doesn't seem unreasonable. Here's what makes this moment so strange. The breakthrough already happened. In 2020, Sinclair's team reversed glaucoma and restored vision in old mice by activating genes that are normally only active in embryos. In 2023, they repeated the experiment in monkeys, and it worked. The mice didn't just stop getting worse, they got better. Their optic nerves regenerated, their vision returned. The study wasn't about vision, really. It was proof that tissues can be reset to youth. If it works for eyes, the logic goes, it can work for hearts, livers, brains, skin, the entire organism. Right now, today, there are molecules being tested that lower biological age in mice after just 4 weeks of treatment. The mice don't just live longer, they become younger. Their organs function better. Their energy returns. Their behavior changes. And researchers are now using AI to create versions of these treatments that can be delivered as pills, not gene therapy. Sinclair estimates these pills could cost around $100 for a month's supply and might be available within the next 10 years. Not gene editing for $2 million per person. Pills. Affordable, scalable, mass-producible pills. If that sounds too good to be true, consider what's already happening quietly in clinics around the world. Senolytics, drugs that clear out worn-out zombie cells that accumulate as we age, entered human trials at the Mayo Clinic in 2019. NAD+ boosters, which restore cellular energy production, have been in human studies since 2024. Metformin and rapamycin, both originally developed for other purposes, are showing lifespan extension effects in animals and are now being tested for anti-aging in humans. These aren't theoretical. They're in clinical pipelines right now. We're living through the early stage of a revolution that most people haven't noticed yet. It's happening in university labs, in billion-dollar startups, in conversations between world leaders caught on hot microphones. The scientific consensus is shifting from aging is inevitable to aging is treatable. That shift changes everything, because if aging is a disease, then curing it becomes a medical imperative, not a philosophical curiosity. And if aging can be reversed, then the question isn't whether some of us will live to 150. It's who will get there first, and whether the rest of us will follow. The revolution already began. We're just starting to realize it. For most of human history, aging was considered as natural and inevitable as sunrise. You were born, you grew, you declined, you died. The process seemed simple, universal, beyond question. But in the last 20 years, scientists discovered something remarkable. Aging isn't one thing. It's not a single switch that flips or a clock that simply runs down. Aging is a symphony of interconnected failures happening simultaneously across every system in your body. And once you understand the parts, you can start fixing them. In 2013, researchers published what became known as the hallmarks of aging, 9 fundamental processes that drive biological decline. By 2023, that list had expanded to 12. These aren't minor factors. These are the core mechanisms that transform a 20-year-old body into an 80-year-old body. Genomic instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic alterations, loss of proteostasis, disabled macroautophagy, deregulated nutrient sensing, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, stem cell exhaustion, altered intercellular communication, chronic inflammation, dysbiosis. Each of these sounds technical, but together they describe everything we experience as aging. Wrinkles, gray hair, weaker muscles, slower thinking, failing organs. Think of your body as an ancient library. The books are your DNA, the instruction manual for building and running every cell. For decades, that library stays organized. Books are shelved correctly. Information is easy to find. The library operates smoothly. But over time, things start to go wrong. Books get misshelved. Pages become dog-eared. The cataloging system breaks down. Dust accumulates. The librarians get tired and stop doing their jobs properly. Eventually, even though all the books are still there, no one can find the right information anymore. The library doesn't function. That's epigenetic aging. The organization of information breaks down, even though the underlying DNA remains mostly intact. This is one of the most important discoveries in aging research. For a long time, scientists believed aging was caused primarily by mutations, actual damage to DNA itself. And mutations do accumulate. But it turns out the bigger problem is epigenetic drift. The chemical tags and structural proteins that control which genes are turned on or off become scrambled. A skin cell starts forgetting it's a skin cell. A neuron loses track of how to be a neuron. The instructions are still there, but the cell can't read them correctly anymore. Function deteriorates not because the hardware is destroyed, but because the software has corrupted. Mitochondria are another crucial player. These tiny structures inside nearly every cell generate the energy that powers everything you do: thinking, moving, breathing, healing. Each cell contains hundreds or thousands of mitochondria, and each mitochondrion has its own small genome, separate from the DNA in the cell's nucleus. When you're young, mitochondria communicate efficiently with the nucleus. They coordinate, they work together. But as you age, that communication breaks down. Mitochondria become less efficient. They produce less energy and more toxic byproducts. The cell starves and suffocates simultaneously. One study showed that when scientists restored communication between the nucleus and mitochondria in old mice by giving them a molecule the body naturally produces, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, or NAD+, the mice's tissue samples resembled those of much younger animals. The aging process driven by this particular breakdown was, in a real sense, reversible. The married couple, as David Sinclair described it, learned to communicate again. Then there are senescent cells, sometimes called zombie cells. Normally, when cells are damaged beyond repair, they either fix themselves or die. But some cells enter a third state, senescence. They stop dividing but don't die. They just sit there, taking up space, secreting inflammatory chemicals that damage neighboring cells. A handful of senescent cells isn't a problem. In fact, they play useful roles in wound healing and preventing cancer. But as you age, they accumulate. By the time you're 70 or 80, millions of these zombie cells are scattered throughout your body, creating chronic low-level inflammation that accelerates every other aging process. Your immune system tries to clear them out, but it becomes less efficient over time, and the problem compounds. In the late 2010s, scientists developed senolytics, drugs that selectively kill senescent cells while leaving healthy cells alone. When they gave these drugs to old mice, something extraordinary happened. The mice didn't just stop declining, they became healthier. Their fur regrew, their organs functioned better, they lived longer. Human trials began at the Mayo Clinic in 2019, testing combinations like dasatinib and quercetin in patients with age-related diseases. The results are still emerging, but early data suggests the approach works in humans too. Telomeres add another layer. These are protective caps on the ends of chromosomes, like the plastic tips on shoelaces. Every time a cell divides, telomeres shorten slightly. After enough divisions, they become critically short, and the cell can no longer divide. It becomes senescent or dies. For decades, telomere shortening was considered the primary aging clock. But recent research shows it's more complicated. Some tissues with very short telomeres function fine. Some tissues with longer telomeres show severe aging. Telomeres matter, but they're one instrument in the orchestra, not the conductor. What makes all of this so different from the past is that we can now measure these processes. Biological clocks, developed by Steve Horvath and others, analyze patterns of DNA methylation, those chemical tags that control gene expression, and calculate your biological age with startling accuracy. Two people born the same year can have biological ages that differ by a decade or more. Someone chronologically 50 might be biologically 40 or 60, depending on lifestyle, genetics, and luck. And because we can measure biological age, we can test interventions. Does this drug make you younger? Check the clock. Does that lifestyle change slow aging? Measure before and after. The 12 hallmarks aren't independent. They reinforce each other. Mitochondrial dysfunction creates oxidative stress, which damages DNA, which disrupts the epigenome, which impairs autophagy, the cellular recycling system, which allows damaged proteins and organelles to accumulate, which creates more stress. It's a cascade, but here's the hopeful part. Because the hallmarks are interconnected, fixing one can improve others. Restore epigenetic organization, and cells start producing functional mitochondria again. Clear senescent cells, and inflammation drops, which reduces stress on surrounding cells. The cascade can run in reverse. Scientists now talk about upstream and downstream interventions. Downstream interventions target the consequences of aging, treating heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes individually. Upstream interventions target the root causes. If you reverse epigenetic aging, the theory goes, all those age-related diseases shouldn't develop in the first place. Your 70-year-old heart would function like a 40-year-old heart, not because you treated heart disease, but because you made the heart young again. This is the paradigm shift. Medicine stops chasing symptoms and starts addressing the source. Of course, we don't fully understand everything yet. Why do some species age rapidly, while others live for centuries? Bowhead whales can reach 200 years. Greenland sharks may live 500. Naked mole rats barely age at all for most of their 30-year lifespan. What do they know that we don't? Researchers are studying these animals, looking for mechanisms that humans might activate or mimic. Evolution solved the aging problem differently in different lineages. We're reverse engineering those solutions. There's also the question of the brain. Most aging research has focused on tissues that regenerate or can be easily biopsied: skin, muscle, blood, liver. The brain is more complex. Neurons don't divide like other cells. Once they're gone, they're mostly gone. But even here, recent discoveries offer hope. The brain retains more plasticity than previously believed. New neurons do form in certain regions throughout life. Cognitive decline correlates strongly with vascular health, inflammation, and metabolic dysfunction, all of which are targetable. And if epigenetic reprogramming works in optic nerves, which are part of the central nervous system, it might work more broadly in the brain as well. What we're learning is that aging isn't entropy. It's not the universe's inevitable grinding toward disorder. It's a programmed process that evolution selected for because it benefited the species, even if it harms the individual. Animals that age and die make room for the next generation, allowing faster adaptation to changing environments. But programs can be rewritten. Biological imperatives can be overridden. We're not fighting the laws of physics. We're debugging software. And once you see aging as a bug rather than a feature, the question changes from, can we fix it? To how fast can we fix it? The enemy is no longer mysterious. We've mapped its territory, identified its strategies, learned its weaknesses. Now the work begins. The conversation about extending human lifespan used to be theoretical. Philosophers debated whether we should. Futurists predicted when we might. But while the debates continued, scientists went into their labs and started solving the problem. The result is that right now, today, we have a growing arsenal of interventions that demonstrably slow, stop, or even reverse aspects of aging. Not in theory, in practice. Some work in mice, some work in primates. A few are already being tested in humans. This is the toolkit, the actual technologies, compounds, and approaches that are making longer, healthier lives possible. Start with senolytics. Remember those zombie cells we talked about? Senescent cells that stop dividing but refuse to die, sitting in your tissues and poisoning everything around them with inflammatory chemicals. Senolytics are drugs designed to kill those cells selectively, leaving healthy cells untouched. The first senolytic combination discovered was dasatinib and quercetin. Dasatinib is a cancer drug. Quercetin is a plant compound found in apples, onions, and tea. Together, they exploit a vulnerability that senescent cells have developed. They've ramped up their survival pathways so aggressively to avoid death that blocking just a few of those pathways causes them to collapse. When researchers at the Mayo Clinic gave this combination to old mice, the results were striking. The mice didn't just live longer, they became healthier. Their muscles grew stronger. Their organs functioned better. They moved more. In one experiment, mice received senolytic treatment when they were already 2 years old, equivalent to a human starting at age 70 or 80. Even at that advanced age, the treatment extended their healthy lifespan significantly. The mice essentially got younger. Human trials began in 2019, testing whether the same approach works in people with age-related diseases like pulmonary fibrosis and osteoarthritis. Early results show reductions in senescent cell numbers, decreased inflammation markers, and improvements in physical function. Another senolytic gaining attention is fisetin, a compound abundant in strawberries. Studies in mice show it reduces senescent cell burden across multiple tissues, including the brain, liver, and kidneys. What makes fisetin particularly interesting is that it's a natural compound with a long history of safe consumption. Clinical trials are underway to determine optimal dosing and effectiveness in humans. Other senolytics in development include navitoclax, piperlongumine, and various formulations targeting specific pathways senescent cells rely on for survival. The field is expanding rapidly, with dozens of candidates in preclinical and clinical stages. The power of senolytics lies in their potential breadth. Animal studies have shown they can delay, prevent, or reduce more than 40 different age-related diseases. Cancers, heart disease, liver disease, kidney disease, lung disease, eye disease, brain disorders. That's not 40 different drugs for 40 different conditions. It's one class of drugs targeting one fundamental aging mechanism with cascading benefits across the entire organism. If this translates to humans at scale, it represents a paradigm shift in medicine from treating diseases individually to addressing their common root cause. Then there's the NAD+ story. Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide is a coenzyme present in every cell, essential for energy metabolism and hundreds of other processes. NAD+ levels decline dramatically with age. By your 50s, you might have half the NAD+ you had in your 20s. This decline impairs mitochondrial function, DNA repair, and cellular communication. Researchers discovered that boosting NAD+ levels with precursor molecules like nicotinamide riboside or nicotinamide mononucleotide can partially restore youthful function. Studies in mice show improved endurance, better cognitive performance, enhanced DNA repair, and extended lifespan. Human trials with NAD+ boosters have been running since the early 2020s. The evidence so far suggests they're safe and do increase NAD+ levels in blood and tissues. Whether that translates to meaningful health span benefits in humans is still being determined, but the mechanistic rationale is strong. David Sinclair takes NMN daily as part of his personal longevity protocol, along with resveratrol, metformin, and other compounds. He's essentially running an N=1 experiment on himself, which is unscientific, but also understandable. When you believe the science is sound and the risk is low, waiting decades for perfect clinical data feels like missing the window. Metformin is another fascinating case. It's a drug used for decades to treat type 2 diabetes, prescribed to millions of people worldwide. But researchers noticed something curious. Diabetics taking metformin seem to live slightly longer than non-diabetics without metformin, even after controlling for other factors. Further investigation revealed that metformin activates AMPK, an enzyme that acts as a cellular energy sensor. When AMPK is activated, it triggers processes associated with longevity, increased autophagy, improved mitochondrial function, reduced inflammation. In worms, flies, and mice, metformin extends lifespan. The big question is whether it does the same in humans. The TAME trial, targeting aging with metformin, was designed to answer that question. It's one of the first large-scale clinical trials treating aging itself as the target, rather than specific diseases. Thousands of older adults without diabetes will take metformin or a placebo, and researchers will track whether metformin delays the onset of age-related diseases and extends healthy lifespan. The trial has faced funding challenges and regulatory hurdles, partly because aging still isn't officially classified as a disease in most jurisdictions. But the trial represents a conceptual breakthrough. The idea that we can and should test interventions for aging as a whole. Rapamycin follows a similar story. Originally developed as an immunosuppressant for organ transplant patients, rapamycin inhibits mTOR, a protein complex that regulates cell growth, metabolism, and aging. When mTOR is overactive, cells prioritize growth and reproduction over maintenance and repair. Inhibiting mTOR shifts the balance toward longevity pathways. Rapamycin is one of the most robust lifespan-extending interventions known. It works in yeast, worms, flies, and mice. Even when given to mice late in life, rapamycin extends their remaining lifespan by 15 to 20%. The challenge with rapamycin is side effects. At the high doses used for immunosuppression, it can cause metabolic problems, increase infection risk, and impair wound healing. But researchers have found that much lower doses or intermittent dosing may provide longevity benefits without significant side effects. Some longevity enthusiasts, including scientists themselves, are already taking low-dose rapamycin off-label. Clinical trials are exploring whether rapamycin can delay Alzheimer's disease, improve immune function in elderly people, and extend health span. The drug has a complicated profile, powerful effects, real risks, uncertain optimal use. But it's part of the toolkit. Exercise and caloric restriction deserve mention too, not because they're new, but because we now understand their molecular mechanisms. Caloric restriction, eating significantly fewer calories while maintaining nutrition, extends lifespan in almost every organism tested, from yeast to primates. The effect is mediated through pathways involving sirtuins, AMPK, mTOR, and others. Exercise activates many of the same pathways. Both interventions improve mitochondrial function, enhance autophagy, reduce inflammation, and improve insulin sensitivity. In a sense, metformin and rapamycin are attempts to get the benefits of caloric restriction without the hunger. Importantly, these interventions can stack. A mouse on caloric restriction lives longer. A mouse on rapamycin lives longer. A mouse on both lives even longer. The same appears true for combinations of senolytics, NAD+ boosters, and other compounds. They target different aspects of aging, and addressing multiple hallmarks simultaneously produces synergistic effects. This is why researchers are increasingly talking about combination therapies, not one miracle drug, but a cocktail of interventions tailored to an individual's biology. The limitation of everything discussed so far is that these are incremental improvements. Senolytics might add a few years of healthy life. NAD+ boosters might slow decline modestly. Metformin and rapamycin offer small percentage gains. Alone, none of these gets us to 150. They're not aging reversal in the full sense. They're damage control, slowing the accumulation of problems, but not fundamentally resetting the system. For that, we need something more powerful. We need cellular reprogramming. That's the subject of the next episode, the technology that might actually let us turn back the clock. But it's worth pausing to appreciate what's already here. We have drugs that clear out toxic cells. We have molecules that restore cellular energy. We have compounds that activate longevity pathways. We have rigorous clinical trials underway. We have scientists taking these substances themselves because they're confident enough in the risk-benefit calculation. The toolkit is no longer hypothetical. It's sitting on the bench, being refined, tested, improved, and it's about to get much more powerful. There's a moment in every scientific revolution when someone discovers something so fundamental that it changes the entire landscape. For aging research, that moment came in 2006 in a laboratory in Kyoto, Japan. Shinya Yamanaka, a stem cell researcher, was trying to answer what seemed like an impossible question. Could you take an adult cell, fully specialized, committed to being skin or liver or blood, and turn it back into an embryonic stem cell, the kind that can become anything? The consensus said, no. Cells don't go backward. Development is a one-way street. Yamanaka proved the consensus wrong. He identified 4 proteins, OCT4, SOX2, KLF4, and c-MYC, now known collectively as the Yamanaka factors, that when introduced into adult cells, erased their cellular identity and restored them to a pluripotent state. A skin cell could become an embryonic-like cell again, capable of transforming into any cell type in the body. The discovery won him the Nobel Prize in 2012 and opened an entirely new field. If cells could be reprogrammed to an embryonic state, perhaps they could be reprogrammed to a younger state without going all the way back. Perhaps aging itself could be reversed. The first person to seriously pursue that idea was Juan Carlos Izpisua Belmonte at the Salk Institute in California. In 2016, his team took mice engineered to age rapidly. They normally lived only a few months and gave them partial cellular reprogramming using the Yamanaka factors, not continuous reprogramming, which would have turned their cells into tumors, but intermittent pulses. The results were extraordinary. The treated mice lived 30% longer than untreated controls. Their organs functioned better. Their muscles remained stronger. They looked and acted younger. The experiment suggested that you could reset the aging clock in a living organism without causing the cells to lose their specialized function. It was the first demonstration that aging could be reversed at the whole organism level. Then in 2020, David Sinclair's lab at Harvard took the idea further. They focused on the optic nerve, part of the central nervous system, which doesn't regenerate in adults. They induced glaucoma in mice, destroying many of the nerve cells that transmit signals from the eye to the brain. Then they delivered the Yamanaka factors using a viral vector. The optic nerves didn't just stop degenerating, they regenerated. Old mice with damaged vision had their sight restored. Even in mice without injury, just aged eyes, the treatment reversed age-related vision decline. The experiment was published in the journal Nature and made headlines worldwide. Sinclair described it as proof that aging isn't just accumulated damage, but also a loss of information, specifically epigenetic information, the chemical tags that tell cells which genes to express. The Yamanaka factors, he argued, restore that lost information, effectively rebooting the cell's operating system. The implications are staggering. If aging is fundamentally an information problem rather than a damage problem, then it's potentially more reversible than anyone imagined. You don't need to repair every broken molecule or replace every worn-out structure. You just need to restore the original instructions, and the cell will repair itself. It's the difference between fixing a corrupted hard drive file by file versus restoring from a backup. The backup, in this case, is stored somewhere in the cell, perhaps in the three-dimensional structure of chromatin, perhaps in poorly understood regulatory networks. The Yamanaka factors seem to access that backup and reset the system. But there's a massive problem. The Yamanaka factors are powerful precisely because they erase cellular identity. Push too hard, and you don't get younger cells. You get cancer. Many of the early mice treated with full reprogramming developed teratomas, tumors made of multiple tissue types scrambled together. The challenge became finding the sweet spot, enough reprogramming to reverse aging, but not so much that cells forget what they're supposed to be. This is called partial reprogramming, and it's extraordinarily difficult. Too little, and nothing happens. Too much, and you get tumors. The window is narrow. Researchers have been refining the approach. Instead of continuous expression of the Yamanaka factors, they use short pulses. Instead of all four factors, they try different combinations or add other proteins that limit pluripotency while preserving rejuvenation. They experiment with timing, how long to treat, how often to repeat, at what age to start. In mice, they're getting better at hitting the target. Sinclair's team reported reversing aging in multiple tissues without tumors in several studies. Other groups have replicated the findings. The biology seems sound. The question now is delivery. Gene therapy, inserting genes into cells using viruses, works in laboratory animals, but is expensive, complex, and risky in humans. Each viral vector has to be carefully designed and tested. Regulatory approval is slow. Manufacturing is difficult. Treatment could cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars per patient. It's not scalable to billions of people. So researchers started looking for alternatives. What if you could achieve the same reprogramming using chemicals instead of genes? In 2023, that breakthrough arrived. Sinclair's lab, in collaboration with researchers in China, published a study showing that a cocktail of 6 small molecules, chemicals, not genes, could reprogram human cells to a younger state. They tested combinations of more than 100 compounds, using machine learning to identify which combinations worked best. The final cocktail reversed cellular age by an average of 3 years in just 4 days of treatment. Cells from elderly donors became biologically younger, as measured by multiple aging clocks. And because it was chemical, not genetic, it could potentially be delivered as a pill. That's the game changer. If cellular reprogramming can be achieved with oral medication, the entire problem changes. Instead of a rare, expensive gene therapy available only at specialized clinics, you have something that could be manufactured at scale, distributed through pharmacies, prescribed by ordinary doctors. It doesn't guarantee success. Chemical reprogramming is still in its infancy, and what works in a petri dish might not work in a living person. But it transforms the path from laboratory to market. Sinclair now predicts that age-reversing pills could be available within the next 10 years, possibly by 2035. That timeline sounded absurd even 5 years ago. Today, it sounds plausible. There's also the question of which tissues can be reached. The optic nerve is accessible because you can inject directly into the eye. Other tissues are harder. Can oral medication reach the brain, the heart, the liver, the bones? The blood-brain barrier blocks most drugs. Some organs have poor blood supply. Delivery is as important as the drug itself. Researchers are exploring nanoparticles, modified viruses, exosomes, and other carriers that can target specific tissues. Some approaches might work systemically, chemicals that circulate through the blood and reach every cell. Others might require localized delivery. The strategy will depend on the target tissue and the condition being treated. Another critical variable is timing. When should reprogramming start? If you begin in your 20s, can you prevent aging from ever taking hold? Or would that be dangerous, interfering with normal development and cellular function? If you wait until your 70s, has too much damage accumulated? Most researchers think middle age, 40s through 60s, is probably the optimal window. Old enough that aging has begun and intervention is beneficial. Young enough that the body can still respond robustly to treatment. But those are guesses. Human trials will have to answer definitively. The ethical and philosophical questions are profound. If we can reverse aging, are we obligated to do so? What does it mean for identity if your 70-year-old body becomes biologically 40 again? Would you still be the same person? And if aging is reversed, what happens to the natural arc of life? Birth, growth, maturity, decline, death? Some people find meaning in that arc. Others see aging as suffering that should be eliminated, no different from disease. There's no consensus, and perhaps there shouldn't be. The technology will become available. Individuals and societies will decide how to use it. But let's be clear about what's actually happening. Graduate students in Sinclair's lab are routinely reversing aging in mice. They're restoring vision in old eyes, rejuvenating damaged tissues, extending health span and lifespan. It's not theory, it's experimental procedure. Monkeys have been treated successfully. The chemistry is being optimized for human use. The regulatory pathway is being mapped. The investment is flowing. This isn't coming in 50 years or 100 years. It's coming in the next decade or two. The first humans to receive age-reversing reprogramming therapy may already be alive. They might be listening right now. The elixir of life, as ancient alchemists imagined it, might not be a mystical potion. It might be 4 proteins or 6 molecules, resetting the clock written into every cell. And if that sounds like science fiction, remember that 15 years ago, reprogramming adult cells into stem cells sounded like science fiction too. Yamanaka did it anyway. Now we're applying the same principle, not to create stem cells, but to create youth. The logic is the same. The technology is maturing. The revolution is already underway. Science doesn't move from laboratory to pharmacy shelf on pure logic alone. It moves on money, ambition, regulatory approval, market dynamics, and the willingness of investors to bet vast sums on uncertain outcomes. The story of longevity research over the past 15 years has been, in many ways, the story of money arriving. Not modest grants or university budgets, but transformational capital. Billions of dollars flowing from Silicon Valley billionaires, venture capital funds, and pharmaceutical companies who suddenly believe that aging isn't an unsolvable mystery, but an engineering problem with commercial potential. That shift in perception is accelerating everything. The modern longevity movement arguably began in 2013, when Google co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin launched Calico Labs. They hired Art Levinson, the former CEO of Genentech, to lead it, and committed resources that, while never fully disclosed, are estimated in the hundreds of millions or low billions. The mission was audacious: use advanced technology and biological insight to enable people to lead longer and healthier lives. Calico operates quietly, few publications, minimal public engagement, but its mere existence signaled that one of the world's most successful companies was taking aging seriously as a tractable problem. That changed the conversation. If Google thinks longevity is worth pursuing, maybe it's not science fiction. The real inflection point came in 2021 with the founding of Altos Labs. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, and at the time the wealthiest person on Earth, joined Russian-Israeli billionaire Yuri Milner and others to establish a company focused on cellular reprogramming. The initial funding was reported at $3 billion, one of the largest biotech launches in history. Altos recruited some of the most prestigious scientists in the field, including Juan Carlos Ispizua Belmonte from the Salk Institute and Steve Horvath, the pioneer of biological clocks. Shinya Yamanaka, the Nobel Prize-winner who discovered cellular reprogramming, joined as a senior scientist. The company's goal is explicit: reverse aging through cellular rejuvenation. Not slow it, not manage it, reverse it. What makes Altos significant isn't just the money. Though $3 billion buys a lot of research, it's the signal it sends. When the world's richest individuals put that kind of capital behind a scientific hypothesis, it attracts talent, legitimizes the field, and accelerates timelines. Researchers who might have spent decades in academic environments competing for grants can now work in well-funded labs focused entirely on a single, ambitious goal. Clinical trials that might have taken years to organize can be launched quickly. The risk tolerance changes. Altos can afford to pursue high-risk, high-reward approaches that conventional funding wouldn't support. Bezos isn't the only tech billionaire investing heavily in longevity. Peter Thiel, the PayPal co-founder, has funded longevity research for years through his foundation and backed companies like Unity Biotechnology, which focuses on senolytics. Thiel is known for controversial statements about wanting to live forever, but his money is going to serious science. Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan committed $3 billion to the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative with a stated goal of curing, preventing, or managing all diseases by the end of the century. While not exclusively focused on aging, much of their funding supports research into fundamental biological processes that underlie age-related diseases. Larry Ellison, the Oracle founder, has donated more than $400 million to aging research over the past 2 decades. The motivations are partly personal. These are individuals in their 50s, 60s, or 70s who have the resources to fund the science that might extend their own lives, but also pragmatic. The longevity industry is projected to become one of the largest markets in history. If aging can be treated, the demand will be universal. Every person on Earth is a potential customer. The economic argument is straightforward. The first companies to develop effective anti-aging therapies will capture enormous value. This isn't altruism. It's calculated investment with the expectation of return, both financial and personal. That calculation extends to governments as well. Aging populations represent one of the greatest fiscal challenges facing developed nations. In Japan, nearly 30% of the population is over 65. By 2050, that figure could reach 40%. Dependency ratios, the number of working-age people supporting each retiree, are collapsing. Pension systems are strained. Healthcare costs for elderly populations are rising exponentially. If people could remain healthy and productive into their 80s, 90s, or beyond, the economic benefits would be staggering. A society where people work longer, stay healthier, and require less medical intervention could be wealthier, not poorer, despite longer lifespans. Aubrey de Grey, the British biogerontologist who has been advocating for aggressive aging research since the early 2000s, makes this point forcefully. He argues that longevity treatments will be made freely available not out of charity, but out of economic necessity. A government that allows its citizens to age and decline while effective treatments exist would face catastrophic healthcare costs and workforce shortages. Providing the treatments would be cheaper than not providing them. De Grey uses a striking term: economic suicide. The phrase is provocative, but the logic is sound. If Japan had a treatment that kept 70-year-olds biologically 50, they would deploy it immediately to stabilize their economy. The same calculation applies elsewhere. De Grey founded the CN's Research Foundation in 2009 to promote what he calls strategies for engineered negligible senescence, a comprehensive approach to repairing all the molecular and cellular damage that constitutes aging. His timeline has always been aggressive. In 2005, he predicted a 50% chance of reaching longevity escape velocity by 2030. He now estimates 2036. Longevity escape velocity is the point where life expectancy increases faster than time passes. You gain more than a year of remaining life for every year you live. If that sounds impossible, consider that medical advances have already extended life expectancy by roughly 3 months per year for the past century. Longevity escape velocity would be an acceleration of that trend, not a departure from it. De Grey is controversial. His predictions are bolder than most scientists, and he's been involved in personal controversies. But his intellectual contributions to the field are undeniable, and his optimism has inspired a generation of researchers. The movement from lab to clinic is governed by regulatory pathways, and those pathways are complex. In most countries, drugs are approved to treat specific diseases, not aging itself. This creates a paradox. If aging isn't classified as a disease, then anti-aging drugs can't be approved, even if they work. The FDA and other regulatory agencies have been slow to adapt. The solution so far has been to target specific age-related conditions: Alzheimer's, osteoarthritis, pulmonary fibrosis, and frame treatments as addressing those conditions rather than aging broadly. It's a workaround, not a solution. The TAME trial, targeting aging with metformin, is attempting to change that framework. It's designed as a large, multi-year study testing whether metformin, a diabetes drug, can delay the onset of multiple age-related diseases simultaneously. If successful, it would provide evidence that aging itself can be a therapeutic target, potentially opening the door for regulatory approval of aging as an indication. The trial has faced funding challenges and delays, but it represents a critical conceptual breakthrough. Treating aging holistically rather than disease by disease could transform medicine. Meanwhile, clinical trials for specific interventions are accelerating. Senolytics are being tested in patients with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, osteoarthritis, chronic kidney disease, and Alzheimer's disease. Results so far are modest but encouraging. Reductions in senescent cell markers, improvements in physical function, some evidence of slowed disease progression. NAD+ boosters are in human trials assessing safety and efficacy. Rapamycin is being tested for immune function enhancement in elderly populations. Each trial adds data, refines understanding, and moves the field closer to approved therapies. The scientists driving this work are a mix of established figures and rising stars. David Sinclair at Harvard has become the public face of the movement, publishing extensively, speaking widely, and building companies to commercialize his findings. His confidence and willingness to engage with media have made him polarizing. Some view him as a visionary, others as overly promotional. But his lab's scientific output is substantial, and his influence on the field is undeniable. Nir Barzilai at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine is leading the TAME trial and has spent decades studying centenarians to understand the genetics of longevity. Judith Campisi at the Buck Institute was a pioneer in senescence research before her death in 2024, and her work laid the foundation for senolytic therapy. Cynthia Kenyon at Calico discovered genetic pathways that double lifespan in worms, demonstrating that aging is genetically malleable. These are not fringe figures. They're respected scientists at elite institutions, publishing in top journals, attracting major funding. The movement also includes a growing ecosystem of startups: Unity Biotechnology, Oicene Biotechnologies, Frequency Therapeutics, BioAge Labs, Life Biosciences, Rejuvenate Bio, Turn Biotechnologies. Dozens of companies are now focused on specific aspects of aging. Some target senolytics. Some work on epigenetic reprogramming. Others focus on mitochondrial health, stem cell rejuvenation, or immunosenescence. The diversity of approaches reflects the complexity of aging, but also the confidence that solutions are within reach. Venture capital is flowing. Billions have been invested in longevity biotech in the past 5 years. Not all these companies will succeed. Many will fail. But the aggregate effort is driving progress faster than any single lab or institution could. There's a social movement emerging as well. Longevity conferences attract thousands of attendees. Online communities discuss the latest research, share personal supplement regimens, and debate optimal interventions. Biohackers experiment on themselves, tracking biomarkers and testing compounds before clinical validation is complete. This DIY approach worries some scientists. Uncontrolled self-experimentation can be dangerous, but it also reflects genuine demand. People are not willing to wait passively for regulatory approval. They want agency over their own aging. The question of access looms large. Will these treatments be available only to the wealthy, at least initially? Almost certainly yes. New therapies are always expensive, but history suggests costs decline rapidly. Gene therapy that cost $2 million per patient a decade ago now costs hundreds of thousands, and prices continue falling. If aging treatments prove effective, competition will drive prices down, and governments will subsidize access for the same economic reasons DeGray describes. The first person to receive an age-reversing pill might pay a fortune. The millionth might pay what they'd spend on a gym membership. The money, the scientists, the companies, the trials, they're all converging. The infrastructure for translating longevity research from bench to bedside is being built in real time. What seemed speculative a decade ago now feels inevitable. The timeline is compressing, and the first humans to benefit might not be our grandchildren. They might be us. Predicting the future is a humbling exercise. No one foresaw smartphones transforming daily life in 10 years, or mRNA vaccines developed in less than a year when a pandemic demanded it. The pace of technological change isn't linear. It's exponential in some domains, stagnant in others, and always surprising. But longevity science has reached a stage where we can sketch a plausible timeline, not with certainty, but with informed, educated guesses based on where the research stands today, what's already in clinical trials, and how long regulatory pathways typically take. What follows isn't prophecy, it's projection, built on the trajectories already visible. We're standing in 2025. The foundation is laid. Senolytics are in human trials across multiple conditions: pulmonary fibrosis, osteoarthritis, chronic kidney disease, cognitive decline. Early results show they're safe at tested doses and produce measurable biological effects. Senescent cell burden decreases, inflammatory markers drop, physical function improves modestly. These aren't dramatic reversals yet, but they're proof of concept. By 2025, some longevity clinics are already offering senolytic protocols off-label to wealthy clients willing to pay thousands of dollars for treatment cycles. The compounds aren't FDA approved for aging, but dasatinib and quercetin are individually available, and physicians have discretion. This gray market will persist until formal approval arrives. NAD+ precursors like nicotinamide, riboside, and nicotinamide mononucleotide are already sold as supplements in many countries, though quality and dosing vary widely. Clinical trials continue to assess whether the increases in NAD+ levels translate to meaningful health span benefits. By 2025, enough data exists that informed individuals are making personal decisions. Some take NMN daily, others wait for stronger evidence. The scientific community remains cautiously optimistic, but not yet convinced. Looking ahead to the late 2020s, let's say 2027 to 2030, we can expect the first wave of explicitly anti-aging therapies to reach market approval in specific contexts. Senolytics will likely be approved for one or more age-related diseases, probably framed as treatments for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis or knee osteoarthritis rather than aging broadly. The labeling will be narrow, but the mechanism is universal. Physicians will prescribe them off-label for other conditions. Insurance coverage will be limited initially, then expand as evidence accumulates. Costs will be high at first, perhaps several $1,000s per treatment course. But competition among pharmaceutical companies will drive prices down. During this period, the TAME trial results should arrive, assuming funding and execution proceed. If metformin shows statistically significant delays in the onset of age-related diseases, it will be a watershed moment. The first large-scale validation that aging itself can be a therapeutic target. Metformin is already generic and inexpensive. Regulatory approval for an anti-aging indication might follow quickly. Millions of people could begin taking it as a preventive measure, much as statins are used now for cardiovascular risk reduction. If TAME fails or shows only marginal effects, it will slow momentum but not halt the field. Too many other interventions are advancing in parallel. The early 2030s, 2030 to 2035, represent a potential inflection point. David Sinclair predicts age-reversing pills based on chemical reprogramming could be available by 2035. That timeline assumes the 2023 findings showing 6-molecule cocktails can reverse cellular age in culture will translate to humans. That delivery mechanisms can be optimized, that clinical trials proceed without major setbacks, and that regulatory agencies approve them. Those are large assumptions, but not implausible. The science is moving fast. If even a fraction of the current investment delivers results, some form of partial cellular reprogramming therapy will enter human trials in the late 2020s. By the mid-2030s, it could be approved for specific uses. Vision restoration, perhaps, or treating specific forms of tissue damage. Broad anti-aging applications would take longer, but the door would be open. This is also the window when Aubrey de Grey predicts we might reach longevity escape velocity. His estimate is 2036, with about 50% confidence. Longevity escape velocity means medical advances are extending life expectancy faster than time passes. Every year you're alive, remaining life expectancy increases by more than a year. It's a threshold, not a sudden event. We won't wake up one day and declare it achieved. Instead, actuarial tables will quietly show that people in their 60s and 70s are gaining years faster than they're losing them. The effect would be most pronounced for those with access to the best interventions, creating disparities, but market forces and policy interventions would eventually broaden access. Reaching escape velocity doesn't require perfect aging reversal. It requires enough interventions stacking together. Senolytics clearing out damaged cells, NAD+ boosters improving mitochondrial function, rapamycin, or similar drugs optimizing metabolic pathways, partial reprogramming, resetting epigenetic drift in key tissues. Each adds a few years. Together, they might add a decade or more of healthy life to someone in middle age. Combine that with continued improvements in treating specific diseases, cancer, heart disease, neurodegenerative conditions, and the cumulative effect could be transformative. By the late 2030s and into the 2040s, 2035 to 2045, we enter speculative but plausible territory. If partial reprogramming works as hoped, it will be refined and expanded. First-generation therapies will be improved. Delivery mechanisms will become more efficient. Dosing will be optimized. Combination therapies will be standardized. The cost, initially prohibitive, will fall as patents expire and generics enter the market. What costs tens of thousands of dollars in 2035 might cost hundreds by 2045. Governments will face immense pressure to subsidize access, both from aging populations demanding treatment and from economic analyses showing the cost-benefit ratio favors widespread deployment. During this period, we should expect regenerative medicine to mature. Stem cell therapies, tissue engineering, and organ regeneration techniques that are experimental today will become routine. A 70-year-old with a failing heart might receive stem cells that regenerate cardiac tissue rather than a transplant. A person with early Alzheimer's might receive neural stem cells or reprogramming therapy that halts or reverses cognitive decline. These aren't cures yet, but they're interventions that extend healthy life significantly. The 2040s will also see artificial intelligence play an increasing role. AI is already accelerating drug discovery, screening billions of molecular combinations in months, predicting which compounds will work, optimizing clinical trial designs. By the 2040s, AI will likely be designing personalized longevity protocols based on an individual's genome, epigenome, microbiome, lifestyle, and real-time biomarker data. Medicine will shift from population-level guidelines to truly individualized treatment. Your longevity plan will be different from your neighbors, tailored to your specific biology. By 2045 to 2050, we arrive at the scenario implied by the title of this series. People who are currently in their 40s, born in the 1980s, will be in their 60s. If they've had access to the interventions developed over the preceding 20 years, their biological age might be 40 or 50, not 65. They'll be healthier, stronger, more cognitively intact than previous generations at the same chronological age. Their projected lifespan, based on current health metrics, could realistically extend to 120, 130, or beyond. Whether they reach 150 depends on what happens in the decades after 2050, whether additional breakthroughs extend the ceiling further, whether aging can be halted entirely, or whether some fundamental biological limit reasserts itself. Research published in 2021 suggested that 150 years might represent a biological limit based on the loss of resilience, the body's ability to recover from stress. Even if aging is slowed, the study argued, eventually resilience declines to the point where any small perturbation becomes fatal. But other researchers dispute this, arguing that if aging mechanisms are addressed comprehensively, resilience can be maintained. The debate is unresolved and won't be settled until we actually try. The first people to reach 120 or 130 will tell us whether 150 is feasible or whether a ceiling exists. It's worth emphasizing who benefits first. The timeline sketched here assumes access to cutting-edge medicine, which initially means wealth, geography, and luck. People in high-income countries with strong healthcare systems will have earlier access than those in low-income regions. People who can afford experimental treatments or private clinics will benefit before those relying on public health systems. This disparity is ethically troubling, but historically consistent with medical innovation. The first antibiotics, vaccines, and cancer treatments were available to the few before becoming available to the many. The trajectory is toward democratization, but the path is uneven. However, longevity interventions have a unique economic logic. Unlike treatments for rare diseases, which serve small markets, anti-aging therapies have universal demand. Every human is a potential customer. Pharmaceutical companies and governments both have incentives to scale access rapidly. Aubrey de Grey's argument about economic suicide applies here. Nations that fail to provide longevity treatments to their populations will face collapsing dependency ratios, unsustainable healthcare costs, and shrinking workforces. Providing the treatments is cheaper than not providing them. This logic will accelerate access more quickly than for most medical innovations. The people most likely to reach 150 by 2050 are those currently between 40 and 60 years old. They're young enough that aging hasn't progressed too far, but old enough to benefit from the full suite of interventions being developed over the next 25 years. Someone born in 2020 might live even longer, benefiting from interventions throughout their entire lifespan. Someone born in 1950, already 75, might benefit partially, but probably won't reach 150 unless breakthroughs arrive faster than anticipated. Timing matters. This timeline is optimistic but grounded. It assumes continued funding, successful clinical trials, regulatory approval, and technological progress at roughly the current pace. It doesn't assume miracles, but it doesn't assume stagnation either. History suggests that once a field reaches critical mass, sufficient funding, talent, and infrastructure, progress accelerates. Longevity research reached that point in the early 2020s. The next 25 years will reveal whether the optimism is justified. One final thought. Timelines are always wrong in detail, but sometimes right in direction. We probably won't cure aging by exactly 2050, and the first person to reach 150 might do so in 2048 or 2053. The specific dates matter less than the trajectory. We're moving from a world where aging is inevitable to a world where it's optional, from a world where 80 is old to a world where 80 is middle-aged. That transformation is underway. The question isn't whether it will happen, but how quickly and who gets to live through it. Imagine waking up in 2050 and glancing at demographic data. The median age in Japan is 75. In Italy, it's 73. Germany, 72. These aren't populations on the verge of collapse. They're populations where 75 feels like 50 used to feel. People are working, traveling, starting new careers, raising second families. The wrinkled faces and frail bodies we associate with old age are less common because biological age has been decoupled from chronological age. This isn't science fiction. It's the logical consequence of the technologies we've discussed becoming widely available. But a world where 150 is normal isn't just our world with older people. It's a fundamentally different civilization with different economics, different social structures, different meanings. We need to think through what that world actually looks like. Start with demographics. Right now, in 2025, the global population is aging rapidly. By 2050, according to United Nations projections made before accounting for major longevity breakthroughs, the number of people over 65 will reach about 1.6 billion, roughly 16.5% of the global population. In some countries, the proportions are far higher. Japan's elderly population will comprise nearly 40% of total population. South Korea, Italy, and Spain face similar trajectories. These projections assume life expectancy continues rising slowly, as it has for the past century, a few months per year. They don't account for senolytics, cellular reprogramming, or any breakthrough that significantly extends health span. Now adjust those projections. If treatments become available in the 2030s that keep people biologically younger for decades longer, the over 65 population doesn't just grow. It becomes a different category entirely. A 70-year-old in 2050 who has had access to longevity interventions might be biologically 50. They're not frail or retired. They're productive, healthy, active. The dependency ratio, the number of working-age adults supporting each retiree, doesn't collapse because people don't retire at 65 anymore. They work into their 80s or 90s, not out of necessity born from poverty, but because they're capable and choose to. This changes everything about economics. Pension systems in most developed countries are designed around the assumption that people work for roughly 40 years and then retire for 10 to 20. The math depends on many workers supporting few retirees. When lifespan extends, but health span doesn't, the system breaks. Too many retirees, not enough workers, unsustainable costs. But when health span extends in parallel with lifespan, the problem inverts. People contribute to the economy for 70 or 80 years instead of 40. They pay taxes longer. They consume and invest longer. They accumulate expertise and institutional knowledge that doesn't disappear at 65. A society where people remain productive for twice as long isn't twice as wealthy. It's exponentially wealthier because experience compounds. Aubrey de Grey makes this argument forcefully. He contends that governments will provide longevity treatments for free, not out of altruism, but because the alternative is economic catastrophe. A nation that allows its citizens to age and decline while effective treatments exist will see its workforce shrink, its healthcare costs explode, and its economic competitiveness collapse. Providing the treatments, even expensive ones, is cheaper than bearing those costs. De Grey calls the failure to provide treatments economic suicide, and the logic is hard to refute. Japan, facing the world's oldest population, has every incentive to deploy anti-aging therapies as soon as they're validated. The same applies to Europe, China, and eventually everywhere. But there's a darker possibility. What if access is unequal? What if longevity treatments remain expensive, available primarily to the wealthy, at least for decades? Then we face a bifurcation, a small class of people who remain biologically young into their hundreds, and a much larger class who age and die as they always have. The social tension would be extraordinary. Wealth inequality is tolerable, barely, when everyone faces the same mortality. But when the rich live healthy, vibrant lives for 150 years while the poor die at 80, the injustice becomes visceral. History offers few examples of such stark biological inequality, and none ended peacefully. The counter-argument is that longevity technology will follow the same trajectory as most technologies, expensive at first, then rapidly cheaper as scale increases and patents expire. The first antibiotics were rare and costly. Within a decade, they were ubiquitous and affordable. The first mobile phones cost thousands of dollars. Now, they're in the hands of billions. Longevity treatments, if they work, will have universal demand, which creates massive market incentives to drive down costs. Competition among pharmaceutical companies, pressure from governments, and the sheer scale of production will make treatments accessible. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen faster than pessimists expect. Education and career structures will transform. Right now, we front-load education, spend the first 20-plus years learning, then apply that knowledge for 40 years until it becomes obsolete. In a world where people live and work for a century or more, that model breaks. Lifelong learning becomes not a buzzword, but a necessity. You might train as an engineer in your 20s, work for 30 years, then retrain as a doctor in your 60s and practice for another 40 years. Serial careers won't be unusual. They'll be the norm. Universities will adapt, offering modular education for people at all life stages. The idea of a single career defining your identity will fade. Retirement itself becomes ambiguous. When you're biologically 50 at chronological 80, do you retire? Some will, choosing leisure and hobbies. Others will continue working, either from financial need or personal fulfillment. The concept of a fixed retirement age, 65 or 70, will seem arbitrary. Policy will have to adapt. Perhaps retirement becomes flexible, something you phase into over decades rather than a hard stop. Perhaps universal basic income or other social safety nets decouple survival from employment, giving people genuine choice about how to spend their extended years. Family structures will evolve in unpredictable ways. Right now, families typically span 3 or 4 generations. In a 150-year lifespan world, 5 or 6 generations could coexist. Your great-great-grandparents might still be alive, active, mentally sharp. Multi-generational households, common in the past and still present in many cultures, might become more prevalent again. Relationships will stretch over longer timescales. Marriages that last 70 or 80 years will be common. So will divorces and remarriages. The idea of a single lifelong partner may persist for some, but serial monogamy over a century-plus lifespan seems equally plausible. Childbearing patterns will shift. Women's fertility windows might be extended through advances in reproductive medicine, or people might choose to have children later, spacing them over many decades. A woman might have a child at 30, another at 60, another at 90. Biologically feasible if aging is arrested. Population growth becomes harder to predict. If people live longer but have fewer children, population might stabilize or even decline. If they live longer and continue having children over extended periods, population could explode. Policy interventions, incentives or disincentives for childbearing might become necessary to manage growth. Environmental impact is complex. More people living longer means more resource consumption, more carbon emissions, more strain on ecosystems at first glance. But healthier elderly people consume fewer medical resources than frail ones. People who remain vigorous longer might travel and consume more, or they might adopt more sustainable lifestyles as they witness climate change unfold over many decades. Long-time horizons change decision-making. If you expect to be alive in 2100, climate change stops being someone else's problem and becomes your problem. That might drive more responsible behavior, both individually and collectively. There's also the question of innovation. Does an older population stagnate, clinging to old ideas, or does accumulated wisdom accelerate progress? Both are plausible. On one hand, revolutions in thought often come from young minds, unburdened by convention. On the other hand, expertise takes decades to build, and many breakthroughs come from experienced researchers synthesizing vast knowledge. If people remain cognitively sharp and mentally flexible into their 90s and beyond, they might combine the creativity of youth with the depth of age. The result could be an innovation explosion. Psychologically, longer lives change how people find meaning. Right now, the arc of life, childhood, adulthood, middle age, decline, death, gives structure to existence. Milestones matter because time is limited. If you have 150 years, does a decade feel like a year does now? Does urgency dissipate? Some people might become complacent, drifting through centuries without purpose. Others might embrace the opportunity to pursue multiple passions, knowing they have time to master fields that would take a normal lifetime each. Meaning won't disappear, but it will have to be actively constructed rather than imposed by mortality. There's a spiritual dimension too. Many religious and philosophical traditions frame death as giving life meaning, as the boundary that makes existence precious. If that boundary recedes, does life lose significance, or does it gain richness? Different cultures will answer differently. Some will embrace extended life as a gift. Others will resist it as unnatural or impious. The debates will be profound and in some cases bitter. But historically, people adapt. When lifespans doubled from 40 to 80 over the past century, society didn't collapse into existential despair. We adjusted. The same will likely happen again. The political implications are staggering. In democracies, elderly voters already wield disproportionate power because they vote at higher rates and constitute a large bloc. If that bloc becomes even larger and remains cognitively sharp and politically engaged for decades longer, their influence will be immense. Will they prioritize long-term stability over short-term experimentation? Will younger generations feel disenfranchised? Intergenerational conflict could intensify, or it could dissipate if the young know they'll eventually benefit from the same technologies. Political systems will have to balance the interests of multiple long-lived generations with very different formative experiences. One often overlooked benefit: reduced suffering. Age-related disease is among the greatest sources of human suffering. Dementia robbing people of their identities, cancer spreading through frail bodies, heart failure leaving people breathless and exhausted. If longevity interventions prevent or delay these conditions, the aggregate reduction in pain and loss is incalculable. Families won't watch loved ones decline over years. People won't spend their final decade in nursing homes. That alone might justify the entire endeavor, regardless of lifespan extension. A world where 150 is normal won't be utopia. It will have new problems, new inequalities, new conflicts, but it will also have new possibilities, more time to learn, to create, to love, to explore. Humanity has always adapted to longer lives. We adapted when antibiotics doubled lifespans in the mid-20th century. We'll adapt again. The question isn't whether we can handle it, but what we'll choose to do with the gift of time. We've walked through the science, the timeline, the economics, the social transformations that might accompany radical life extension. We've talked about mice growing young again, billionaires investing billions, and world leaders casually discussing 150-year lifespans. The momentum is real. The research is progressing. The future we've described is plausible, perhaps even probable if current trends continue. But now we need to sit with the uncertainty, the questions that don't have answers yet, the dilemmas that science alone can't resolve, the philosophical territory where reasonable people disagree. Here's the first question, and maybe the most important one. Is 150 really the limit, or is it just the beginning? The 2021 study suggesting 150 years as a biological ceiling was based on the concept of resilience, the body's ability to recover from stress. The researchers argued that even if we slow or reverse individual aging processes, eventually the system as a whole loses the capacity to bounce back from perturbations. A small infection, a minor injury, a momentary metabolic imbalance, any of these could cascade into failure if resilience is exhausted. They calculated 150 as the approximate point where resilience reaches zero, making death inevitable even in the absence of specific disease. But that calculation assumes we only address some hallmarks of aging, not all of them comprehensively. What if cellular reprogramming restores resilience itself? What if we can reset not just individual tissues, but the entire organism's regulatory networks? Aubrey de Grey argues that if we repair damage faster than it accumulates, there's no theoretical limit. The first person to reach 150 might live to 200. The first to reach 200 might live to 500. The first to 500 might live to 1,000. He said repeatedly that the first person to live to 1,000 is probably alive today, possibly only a few years younger than the first to reach 150. That sounds absurd until you remember that longevity escape velocity means each year of progress buys more time to develop the next breakthrough. The runway keeps extending. We don't know. We won't know until we try. The honest answer is that 150 might be a hard ceiling, or it might be an early milestone on the way to something far more radical. The science will tell us, but only after decades of experimentation on actual humans living through the process. This generation, The people alive right now are the experiment. The second question is ethical, and it cuts deep. Should we cure aging when we can't cure poverty? When millions of people lack clean water, basic health care, adequate nutrition, is it morally defensible to spend billions extending the lives of those who are already privileged? The criticism is valid. Resources are finite. Every dollar spent on longevity research is a dollar not spent on malaria prevention, food distribution, education in developing regions. If aging research primarily benefits the wealthy, at least initially, aren't we widening the gap between rich and poor in the most fundamental way possible? Access to life itself. The counter-argument has two parts. First, the technologies developed for longevity will cascade into broader health benefits. Understanding cellular senescence helps treat cancer, heart disease, neurodegenerative conditions, diseases that affect everyone, rich and poor, NAD+ metabolism, mitochondrial function, epigenetic regulation. These aren't luxury concerns. They're fundamental biology. Advances in one area accelerate progress across the field. The insulin developed for diabetics in wealthy countries eventually became available globally, saving millions of lives. The same trajectory likely applies to longevity interventions. Second, the economic argument de Grey makes applies globally. Nations with aging populations, China, India, much of Europe and East Asia, face the same fiscal pressures. Keeping people healthy longer is cheaper than managing age-related disease. The incentives exist everywhere, not just in wealthy countries. If treatments prove effective, they'll spread because governments can't afford not to deploy them. This doesn't erase inequality. Early access will still favor the rich, but it suggests the window of exclusivity will be shorter than for most medical innovations. Still, the ethical discomfort remains. There's something troubling about a world where some people live vibrant, healthy lives for 150 years, while others die at 50 from preventable causes. Longevity research doesn't solve global inequality. It might exacerbate it, at least temporarily. We have to hold that tension rather than dismissing it. The third question is about identity and meaning. If your 70-year-old body becomes biologically 40 again, are you still the same person? You'll have memories, experiences, relationships spanning decades, but your cells will be young. Your organs will function as they did in youth. The person looking back at you from the mirror won't match the person you remember becoming. Philosophers call this the problem of personal identity. What makes you, you? Is it continuity of memory? Physical continuity? Psychological continuity? If the physical substrate changes radically, does the self persist? There's no scientific answer to this. It's a question each person will have to navigate personally. Some will embrace rejuvenation as a gift, a second or third or fourth chance at life. Others will feel unsettled, dislocated in time, haunted by the gap between chronological age and biological age. We don't have cultural frameworks for this yet. Our stories, our rituals, our language all assume that aging is linear and irreversible. We'll have to invent new narratives. Related to identity is the question of meaning. Does death give life meaning? Many people believe it does, that the finitude of existence makes each moment precious, that knowing we have limited time creates urgency and purpose. If that time extends indefinitely, does life become trivial? Do we drift through centuries without direction, bored, and apathetic? Or does more time allow deeper engagement, richer understanding, more profound contributions? The existentialists argued that meaning isn't given, it's created. We don't find purpose in life, we make it. If that's true, then longer life doesn't diminish meaning. It expands the canvas on which meaning can be painted. You have more time to love, to learn, to create, to explore, to fail and try again. Death doesn't stop being real. Accidents, violence, unforeseen illness will still claim lives. But the urgency shifts from, I must do this before I die, to, I have time to do this well. Whether that's liberating or paralyzing probably depends on temperament. There's also the question of nature and evolution. Aging evolved for a reason, not for the individual's benefit, but for the species. Organisms that age and die make room for the next generation, allowing faster adaptation to environmental changes. Sexual reproduction shuffles genes, creating variation. Natural selection acts on that variation. Death is part of the cycle that drives evolution. If we stop aging, do we stagnate as a species? Do we lose the mechanism that's allowed life to adapt for billions of years? The short answer is that cultural evolution has already replaced biological evolution as the primary driver of human change. We adapt through technology, language, social organization, not through genetic mutations selected over generations. Humans 10,000 years ago were biologically almost identical to us, but culturally unrecognizable. Extended lifespans won't slow that process. If anything, they might accelerate it, as accumulated knowledge compounds over longer timescales. But there's a deeper discomfort here, one that's harder to articulate. Aging feels natural. It's part of the cycle of life that we see everywhere in the world. Flowers bloom and wilt, seasons change, generations rise and fall. To intervene in aging feels like defying nature, playing God, crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. That intuition is powerful, and it won't be easily dismissed with logic or data. Yet humans have always defied nature. We wear clothes in winter, build shelters against storms, cure diseases, fly through the air. Every medical intervention, every vaccine, every surgery, every antibiotic is an act of defiance against natural processes that would otherwise kill us. The question isn't whether we should intervene in nature, but which interventions are justified and which risks are acceptable. Reasonable people will disagree. Some will see aging as a disease to be cured. Others will see it as sacred, inviolable, essential to what it means to be human. There's no resolution here, only recognition. We're entering territory where science and ethics intersect, where data can inform but not decide. These are conversations societies will have to navigate, culture by culture, community by community. Here's a more practical uncertainty. Who will choose not to live longer? We assume everyone would want radical life extension if offered, but that assumption might be wrong. Some people find peace in the natural arc of life. Some feel they've lived enough, accomplished what they set out to do, and are ready to let go. Some believe in an afterlife and see death as a transition rather than an end. Some might reject rejuvenation on religious, philosophical, or personal grounds. The choice not to extend life is as valid as the choice to extend it, and a truly humane future should honor both. There's also the urgency of now. The decisions made in the next 10 to 15 years will determine who benefits from these technologies first. Policy choices about funding, regulatory frameworks, access, and equity will shape outcomes for generations. If we treat longevity as a luxury good, it will remain one. If we treat it as a public health imperative, it will become accessible faster. The science is moving faster than the social infrastructure to deploy it justly. We need to catch up. One final thought, and maybe the most important: we're not predicting the future. We're already living in it. The revolution didn't begin with some distant breakthrough that will arrive decades from now. It began in 2006 when Yamanaka reprogrammed adult cells. It accelerated in 2016 when Belmonte extended lifespan in mice. It intensified in 2020 when Sinclair restored vision in old animals. It's happening right now, in labs, in trials, in conversations between world leaders, in the decisions billionaires are making about where to invest. The first humans to receive age-reversing therapies aren't hypothetical people in the distant future. They're probably listening to this right now, or will be in the next few years. The question isn't whether aging can be cured. The question is whether we're ready for what happens next. Whether we'll distribute the benefits justly. Whether we'll adapt our institutions and cultures to accommodate longer lives. Whether we'll use the extra time wisely or squander it. Those are human questions, not scientific ones. The science will give us the tools. We have to decide what to build. There's no tidy conclusion here, no comforting summary that wraps everything together. The future is uncertain, plural, contested. Some of us will live to 150. Some of us won't. Some will welcome it. Some will resist. The arc of history doesn't bend automatically toward justice or wisdom. It bends where we push it. The opportunity is extraordinary. So is the responsibility. The first person to live to 150 might already be alive, perhaps listening right now, wondering if it could really be true. The answer is maybe, probably. We're about to find out together. And that's not a conclusion. It's an invitation. Not to fear death less, though that might come with time, but to love life more and to use whatever time we're given, whether 80 years or 150, to build something worth living for. The rest is just details. And the details, as it turns out, are unfolding right now.